Hello, everybody, and good morning to you. And for the record, thank you guys for tuning in, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. Happy Tuesday to you guys. We're coming up quick on the 4th, so hopefully you guys are getting ready for the night, a good holiday, and hopefully you're having fun with friends, doing something in the water, shooting off fireworks, but not be safe, please. Now, as you guys already know, this is a daily thing that we do, and I have an amazing guest for you guys. Now, before I bring my guest up here, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and that way you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And if you know anyone who could benefit from the conversation that we have, please share this along with them. This helps us get more people the resources and the help that they need as they're grieving. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say that this is for educational purposes only. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section, and we'll be sure to answer those as we go along. Now, without further ado, please help me welcome my next guest, the amazing Janis. Janis, how you doing?
Hi, nice to see you.
So nice to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We talked one time before, and I'll tell you, we could talk forever.
We can. This is a fact.
So I definitely look forward to this conversation. I look forward to just embracing in your knowledge about the work that you do. Now, before we get started, do me a favor, tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Perfect. My name's Janis, and I am a trauma-sensitive movement specialist. I live in Canada, and I really help people feel better in their body. And that means a lot of different things. But basically, a lot of us are walking around in physical or emotional pain. And so I am using exercise tools and strategies along with some mental health somatization strategies. So that's where the trauma comes in, to really integrate the mind and the body and have a better experience of our body. Obviously, when we're talking about things like grief, we carry that heaviness and we carry grief in our bodies. So it's really important work that I do in a lot of different aspects, because I'm sorry. we think about exercise as, weight loss and going to the gym, but exercise and movement are super core to the experience of processing emotions and of really living an integrated life.
And, I find that interesting because I am a personal trainer, and before I got into grief work, I never really thought about incorporating personal training into grief work, right? Until I actually got in and started working with men. I was like, these men, when they feel good and look good, they tend to open up, and
it's true.
A lot more, right?
It's true.
When did you put two and two together and go, you know what, this right here, this is a thing?
It was a long time ago. So I have a bricks and mortars business. So I actually have a physical location where I'm working with people. And when I opened that, I wanted it to be really personal in every sense of the way. So although we talk about, personal training or private sessions, most of the facilities that you go to, whether it's a gym or even for a massage, you're really in a space with other people. So you're in a clinic, in a studio, in a gym, in a big setting. And I actually opened a place with a few hundred square feet where I am the only practitioner in the space with a client. And that actually changes everything. And I changed it so much I didn't even know what I was getting myself into. And so to fully clarify, I'm trained and was trained at that time in what we used to call mind-body disciplines. So that's going to be our Pilates and our yoga. And then I have a technique called Yamana body rolling, critical alignment therapy. So those are more kind of in the body work category. So what would happen is I would start working with people with exercise and some of those bodywork techniques, and they would start having really large emotional releases. And I wasn't prepared for that at all. And I think that knowing what I know now, there's a few reasons why that was happening. One, it really is the actual movement and kind of the depth of that experience. It's also that attunement to another person and the privacy of that space. Just like we would go to a therapist, you're not typically in a therapist's office having a private session in the corner while the rest of the clinic is going on. So there is that personal element to it. And then there really is something with moving our body that is really fundamental. And again, kind of having taken subsequent trauma trainings, that is super fundamental to trauma, emotions, and self-regulation. But at the time when I was trying to put it together, all I knew was that I would intake clients, and at a kind of certain point in the process, it would be quite common, abundantly common, like to the point where it was more common than not common. People would start revealing really heavy emotional things to me. And I ended up going to a therapist's office down the hallway from me who had his own practice and saying, you know, I don't know what to do with this, because nothing in the training, including yoga, which talked about kind of spirituality and that mind body connection, prepared me for how do I respond to these people. Like, I'm not their friend. I also don't want to cross professional boundaries because I'm not a therapist. So what do I do with this? And that started, that conversation with him really started kind of that search for who in the world is putting these together. Where do I find this information? And it did come through the trauma world, and subsequently the word trauma has kind of exploded in popular culture, and it's all over the place and a little bit controversial in terms of what it means. But from the lensing that I am trained in now, it's really taking those emotional experiences and recognizing that they sit in our body. And so our nervous system is producing about 80% of the material that ends up in our brain, and that's all coming from the body. So when we have these overwhelming experiences, they do sit in the body, which totally explains why people would start crying or having other breakdowns. But, you know, it dates back almost a decade, at which point that was really difficult information to kind of find and put together and figure out how to kind of, what's the next step and where do I go and who do I train with and how do I help these people?
Right. I love that you said that. And I just want to ask a question, because I've done research with certain traditions in Africa, the Amazon, etc. Right, and it kind of relates to, you know, well, not really. It relates to what you're saying, like movement for sure, and things like that. And I've seen a lot of movement ceremonies. Like there's a ceremony that they have over in Africa, that you go in through Paris, you hike up through the mountains, you go up to the top, and there's a shaman up there, and there's a tribe up there, right? I forget how often they do it, but you go up there, a group, and I think it's like a two-week ceremony.
Amazing.
You go up there, there's music, and things like that, and that's all it is, right? And there's food and everything to where you can eat, but once the music starts, the rule is that you don't stop until you have nothing else left. So,
wow.
I mean, and it's crazy, right? Because they're dancing and screaming and you know, and for weeks on end. And then after there's a release.
Yeah.
And it relates to what you just said, that movement. I always found that fascinating about how much have we lost in our culture, right? When it comes down to grieving. And you know, I had a friend of mine. He is actually from Africa. He used to always tell me, "You guys don't know how to grieve. You guys don't." And so he used to always give me a hard time. Right?
Yep.
And I was like, "What do you mean grieve?" He was like, "You guys don't know how to grieve, you know." And he goes, "You gotta move. You gotta move it through."
Yeah.
You know, because grief gets trapped in there, and that's how you get sick. He goes, "You want to know why I look so young?" I go, "Not really, because I'm chasing giraffes or something like that." So he just looked at me. He goes, "You know what? I'll give you that one." He goes, "No." He goes, "Because over in my culture, we know how to move.
That's true.
Music, the vibration.
Yeah.
Right." He goes, the vibration, the drums, it helps move the grief throughout the body.
This is true.
The problem is that most people grieve within their head, you know, and,
that's right.
And they keep everything separate.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on that philosophy a little bit and get your thoughts on, you know, when we talk about the disconnect between the head and the body, is there a disconnect, or is there just a stubbornness, I would like to say. Right? I mean, and when I say that, right, I mean, because we don't know how to grieve, that we don't trust ourselves enough to allow our bodies to regulate the grief throughout, to have that connection that we need. And so that's why I said, is there a stubbornness? Because I would like to say there is a stubbornness, because no one wants to hurt, right?
No, absolutely. I agree. So yes and yes. And I think that what often happens is,
Oh, you froze up on me.
so am I back?
Yeah, you froze up, but I
Okay.
can hear you. I can hear you. I got you.
Okay, perfect. So I think probably and joy and those positive emotions, that's and I'm going to put a quotation or marks around those, the positive. And then we have things that we call, again, quotation marks, negative emotions. So that's our sadness, our grief, our anger, fear, things like that. And I think that what often happens in adults is that we don't actually have great emotional processing skills, period. End of the sentence. And then we have overwhelming experiences such as grief. And because we actually don't know how to move that through our bodies on a good day, when we end up in these really challenging circumstances, we get stuck and we don't know. So, I mean, it is a kind of stubbornness, but I would call it like a cultural stubbornness as opposed to an individual one. If you have never been taught how to be sad or how to be angry or how to allow an emotion to pass through you or how to process it, how to apply rhythm and regulation and how to self-regulate, how are you going to do that during one of the most difficult experiences of your life? You're not. Because if you can't do that on a smaller level, you can't do it on a bigger level. So I think that some of the rooting of that really goes back to, that the idea that it's all in the mind, it's all in the mindset, it's all in the brain. We really had like a couple of centuries where we elevated the brain, which that did some stuff for us as a culture, but we left the body out of it. And it's funny because now there's like research around these things, which, as you already mentioned, you go into different cultures in the world and you go into historical investigation and you look at modern hunter-gatherers, and in all of these cultures there are rituals, there's rhythm,
right.
there is a way to move our body and to process things and to do it in community. And now we have to break it down into, we know from research that there's attunement between people. We know that rhythm is part of processing. We know that you have to move and integrate the body, but this all feels very new, like since 1990, when in actual fact, you go back 200 years, 300 years, you go into modern hunter-gatherers, you go back in history, you can see, cave paintings that depict these things. Right. So it's kind of like with modern culture came elevation of the brain as the control center, and that allowed us to advance as a society in a lot of ways, but we also lost and kind of forgot some of these components that we thought weren't that important, that turned out to actually be kind of the key to unlocking the door. And one of those things is actually movement. And we know from research that rhythm is a huge piece of being able to process and regulate the body. Rhythm happens with music, rhythm happens with exercise. And so that's one of the mechanisms, it's certainly not the only one, that helps us re-regulate our system, so that grief isn't kind of, it feels like it in the moment, but that when it comes in, that it's just stuck there and you're going to be stuck there forever. Right. It's a process of feeling that discomfort, being able to sit with it or walk with it or live with it, and then knowing that those waves come in, but that you're not going to be stuck there. And that rhythm is super important. So I wouldn't say that it's like a personal stubbornness to just refuse to acknowledge the body. I think that we often aren't familiar with what those sensations are. We have a lot of fear around them. We also have the culture saying, you shouldn't have this. Or there's many people that have been in grief processes that are told in both subtle and overt ways that they quote unquote should be over it after a certain amount of time. And so, I think there's just all these different messages and all these different things that contribute to that. But I wouldn't say it's a personal choice to say, nope, I'm not going to acknowledge my body.
Understood. It goes back to something I've been throwing around, this idea or this thought, and it relates. And I think maybe I reworded it, and I want to be careful. I think I said stubborn when I should have said trust, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, and I've been talking about this, and I've been diving deeper into it. And the more I dive deeper into it, I go down that rabbit hole, right? And I came up with this thought: trust is earned.
Yes.
And what and I'll get your thoughts on this. But what I mean by that, how we want to trust people, we want to trust therapists to be able to do their job, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about ourselves and going through and healing from traumatic experiences and grief through loss, no matter what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
We forget to trust ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And what we end up doing, and I think, and this is just a thought, as we begin to get older and society teaches us all of these different beliefs and things like that, we tend to mimic and pick up habits from others, from our culture, and just through life in general, right? And we develop this sense of security, a protection mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just talking about this, and we put up these walls. And so when it comes down to understanding or allowing ourselves to allow that grief to do what it needs to do by into our bodies, I think we've been conditioned not to trust ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with that philosophy that trust is earned, not just with other people, but with yourself.
Yes.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit, and then we can dive. I want to dive into some more of your work. I find it fascinating.
I think you're kind of touching on a really interesting concept with the trust is earned, and when it comes to our body, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think many of us don't trust it. So we may have had traumatic experiences as children. That can be one reason we don't trust our body. Another is actually the way that we teach and educate human beings in our culture about our bodies. So typically, by the age of 12, girls believe that their body is about what it looks like. Boys still tend to have the belief and the notion that it's about what their body can do, but neither of those are about living inside our bodies. So whether it's what our body looks like, which is really on the outside, or what our body can do, which is a tool to accomplish things, neither of those really are about, I am a human being and a soul and a set of experiences that's living inside of this, and I am one with my body and my body is one with me. And so that creates kind of the beginning of, well, that isn't the beginning, because if by age 12 we already have these beliefs, they're quite baked in. But I think when it comes specifically to exercise, which is kind of my corner of the world, a lot of the messaging about exercise has to do with weight loss, aesthetics, looking good, and achieving certain kind of personal bests, whether that be running or weightlifting. Very little of the messaging about going to the gym or exercising is about being. It's not about being in our body or about what a comfortable experience is. It's, think about going to a gym and going to a class. It's really focused on like pushing through, that word is literally used, or counting down or achieving a goal. And if you look at all the marketing, there's no marketing out there that's promoting just joining the gym just to go. They will always ask you, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of it? And so we really learn that our body is a tool to get something, to achieve something, to look a certain way. And very few of us kind of can just rest in our bodies as this comfortable place where we can just be in it, and maybe exercise because it feels good. And so that becomes really challenging when we get into these kind of grief moments, because that's not a good time to learn what how to be with an uncomfortable sensation, or how to
Right.
move with rhythm through these waves that are just heavy inside the body. And so one of the things that I do teach is a technique where we sit in discomfort in the body, and you sit there for 3 to 5 minutes in an uncomfortable space, because we have to have that trust and have that self awareness that we can sit there and we won't die, and we don't need to go shopping, we don't need to start drinking, we don't need to try to escape that. We can just be there and it'll be okay, and we're going to come out of it. And so trust is very much earned in our body, but I think that the structure that we're living in doesn't really allow us to get there, because if by age 12 we're already thinking, what can my body do, how can my body look, that's not the foundation of trust. Would you want to be in a relationship with that?
I totally agree. I totally agree. And that's what I said, when I started thinking about it, I started putting all these different things together, and I was like, man, this is something, something to explore. How do we get people to understand how to trust, how to earn that trust with themselves? Right.
Yeah. And that's really what the words feel heavy and it feels like a big title, but that's really what trauma sensitive work is all about. It's about putting choice and effective action back to the person, not to the instructor, not to culture. And what I will tell you from doing this work, it's really, really hard, and it feels very strange. It often feels, interestingly enough, it almost feels boring to a lot of people to start that work, because we start with choice with the body. And what taking effective action means is being able to assess and get feedback from your body and saying, there's nothing wrong with high intensity exercise. Maybe you do want to go for a run, but it's being able to evaluate what your body needs and then going and doing it. So it might be very gentle. It might be laying on the floor. It might be doing yoga, but it also might be running or boxing or getting some of that aggression or anger out of the body. So what is an effective action for your body, and what does choice actually feel like? And the reality is, in almost every person I've ever worked with, the idea of choice over our body is so foreign that they don't know how to actually start processing that idea. Yeah. It's so interesting. And that includes myself. I mean, when I started doing this work, I was like, oh, wow, when are we going to get to the actual exercise part? And then within a couple of weeks, I ended up crying, because I'd never had the experience of having actual choice over my body. Not like that.
And we're going to get into that. And before we get into that, because you said something at the beginning of the conversation that I want to touch on about the misinformation about trauma, right? Because we have different definitions.
We
right?
do. We do.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and then dive a little bit deeper?
Yeah. So I want to kind of preface this by saying, so I have training from Gabor Mate. I have his compassionate inquiry training, and I have training from Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote When the Body Keeps the Score. And so these things that I'm sharing are not from me. So it's not necessarily my opinion. It's from a couple of the trauma researchers that are really or trauma leaders, I would say, that have kind of created some of the information in this field. Most of these men have been studying this. So, Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory, the two that I just named, as well as Peter Levine. So I've kind of dabbled in all of these, or finished certifications in all of these. These are people that have led the field. So the basic of what we know as trauma right now, you're right, there's quite an array of different definitions. And part of the reason for that is because we didn't really use the word trauma at all, to the best of my knowledge, in the 1900s. And kind of the rooting of what we think of trauma came from World War II. So we know that a whole bunch of soldiers came back and there was something going on with them. And then that started being known as shell shock. And that's what many people still think of as trauma. So trauma has to be a big event where something really significant happened, and that's where the conversation kind of gets muddy, because that is true. Then fast forward in time, in the 70s, that was studied as trauma. That was the largest cohort of studied trauma survivors. So the really interesting group of people. One of the things we know about this, and I love this fact, is that that group of men on average took 20 years to start dealing with their trauma. So they were middle-aged people by that point. It is a little bit unknown in that research if it's because they kind of had to get to a certain age where the other life factors kind of became heavy, or if there's just kind of an extension on a lot of people just take a long time to process that. And I love sharing that because again, we kind of talk to grieving people like, you've got a month and then and then you should be like over this. And I laugh because it's like so ridiculous. So it may take 20 years. And that's okay, because we know from research with the World War II veterans that it can. So again, fast forward in time, and in the 1990s, a woman named Judith Herman entered the picture, and she really revolutionized the concept of trauma as being relational. So we know that most trauma comes from relationship, and therefore it's healed in relationship. And then that's where we really started to discover things like the adverse childhood experiences, which if you have not heard of them, you can Google them. But basically, we look at things that might have happened during your childhood. So I know, Tony, when you and I spoke before, you identified a few of those items in your childhood. Most of us can identify at least one. But when we look at things like a parent was in prison, or you were sexually or emotionally abused as a child, etc. So we know that has a long-term impact. So again, that kind of got thrown in the mix. Now, when you fast forward to today, what we also know is it's not just what happened, but it's what maybe didn't happen. So now we're getting into like even more subtle nuance of perhaps there wasn't emotional nurturing, perhaps there wasn't kind of the capacity for somebody to be themselves as a child, etc. So as time goes on, it went from somebody was involved in this major incident to it could have been something that happened during childhood to maybe it was something that didn't happen in your life that should have. So I think that's why we kind of get all over the place, and this word can be very agitating to people, and they're like, I don't even know what it means, and everybody's got trauma and this and that. But that's why. It's because it has actually evolved as the research has evolved. In the 1990s, along came fMRI machines that we could actually start to literally magnetically image the brain. And that's when we start to see a whole emergence of different studies and different results. And that's part of why a lot of this is kind of a bit new, because prior to that, it was like talking through people's experiences, which are, as we know, subjective. We didn't really have the science to kind of measure what's happening. So all of that said, trauma is an experience that overwhelms the body that you cannot process. It can be big, it can be small, it can be from childhood, it can be from yesterday. And what that really means when the body cannot process it is that we do not have the skills, the capacity, the time, the energy, whatever it is, to actually move that through the body. And when I'm talking about moving it, it's literally physically in your tissues, in your cells, in your nervous system. And so there's many things that we know can help you process that. But as we talked about already, if you have zero skill set, perhaps if you had childhood trauma, if you've never done it before, it can be very overwhelming to the body. So when we're talking about grief, that often is kind of a pinpoint in the map where that is a very overwhelming experience, where we need support, we need community, we need movement, we need rhythm, we need artistic expression. We need a lot of things that for many people have never been part of their life, never been part of that foundation. Very difficult time to kind of practice a whole new skill set. So that can be something that kind of gets stuck in the body. We don't maybe know these sensations. Maybe we don't know these experiences. And so grief can be a trauma. It also might not be. So this is not a universal, and that's also what makes it really challenging, is because grief can be an emotion, it can be an experience. It's not necessarily a trauma, but it might be. So that's, like a little bit of insight and background as to why that word is a little bit, it's a little bit muddy. And it is, because you and I could be in the same exact experience. I might get traumatized by it, you might not. During the pandemic, lots of people were saying this is a global trauma. It wasn't a trauma for everybody. It was a trauma for some people, and that relates to how you experienced it, what you experienced, your specific background, the resources, the community, the capacity you had to kind of move through the emotions of it, if you had any, etc. So, we literally had, and I bring that up because we had that experience where everybody on the planet experienced the same event, but the way that we experienced it and how we process it can be quite different. And that's why it gets a bit confusing and muddy. So a trauma is anything that you define as an overwhelming experience that you do not have the skills, tools, capacity to process. And it can be old, it can be new. I think the only definition that's kind of like rejected, if you will, is a trauma is not just something that's like unpleasant that you didn't like, or that you're like, I was so traumatized by that movie. Like probably not. So it's probably not something really that happened yesterday, because that's so fresh that we don't know if it was a trauma yet. But it's something where your nervous system will have a strong reaction to something in the future because you weren't able to kind of re-regulate yourself now.
Okay, well, that makes perfect sense. We got a couple comments coming in on Instagram.
Awesome.
Victoria Lottie's story. Hopefully I'm saying that right, because I do have a tendency of slurring people's names. They just said, their first comment was, gosh, that breaks my heart. And absolutely, yes. They're referring to what you were talking about, the soldiers.
Yeah.
And their second comment was, yes, healing takes time. It's a life journey. It's true. And as you said before, it takes people that have gotten some experience, that got some knowledge, and able to go back out and articulate and teach other people how to properly heal in those different areas, right?
Yeah. And I wanna just interrupt and say, it's not intellectual teaching. It is a way of being. And so what we know, again, from the research, is that we need to be around other regulated people. Right. And so that's part of why it gets tricky, is because if we didn't have regulated parents, if we don't have regulated people in our community or our social network or our mentor group or whatever it is, it's going to be really hard to re-regulate. So that's a benefit from therapy. So if you are speaking to a regulated grief counselor or therapist, or you go to a grief group and there is one regulated person, our nervous systems will attune to that and they can learn from that. So no words even need to be spoken necessarily, although in most of those environments they are. But that's really key to part of that integration. And I think the second thing, and this is really to Victoria, we do use the word healing a lot kind of in the trauma community. There is no point at which we are quote unquote healed. So it's not like a puncture wound to the skin where we have a scab and then the scab comes off and we're good to go. I think that in my experience, it's a process, and it's a lifelong process of integrating experiences, practice, regulating, practice. But I think sometimes and I'm not suggesting that Victoria was meaning this, but I see that word so regularly that I think sometimes people think if I do the work, there is an end point. Not necessarily. Right. There's a shift, there's a change, there's an evolution, but there isn't necessarily that moment when you look at your skin or feel your body where you're like, okay, I'm back to healed, right? So that's important to say that, because I think, especially when we're talking about grief, there's never a time when we go back to not having that experience. So the idea is to integrate that into our lives and to accept and to come to peace with it. But there's there's no going backwards to who we were before that. You can never unknow that or never have it not be there. And that's part of where Gabor Mate's work of compassionate inquiry really comes in. It's accepting, and it's having compassion for what happened, and it's not trying to make it go away, or that it never happened, or that we can be who we were before we knew that or experienced that.
Nice. For everyone tuning in, if you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section. I want to say good morning to Millionaires Are Made. Thank you, brother, for tuning in. Definitely means a lot. Thank you for the continued support. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or comments for Janis, please put them in the comment section.
Yeah.
As we go along and everything. And again, for everyone, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it. I love the fact that you integrated that, and I want to touch on that and add to it just a little bit. When it comes down to those different layers, especially grief and trauma, the addiction, the mental health aspect, and it's like that. Oftentimes, what I find where people find themselves in trouble, they forget that it's all part of the same unit. Right?
Yes,
it's all part of you, right? And so they often go out and they separate it. And then, like say for instance, you may be struggling with your mental health, right? And you go in, you do all the classes, you go to these groups, and you got some beautiful tools. So a little off, right? I think, and this is just my thought pattern on it. We can work with that, but we also have to address the emotional aspect, the physical aspect, and also the spiritual aspect, right?
Absolutely.
I love that you read the book, The Body Keeps Score, because that's a true statement. If people really pay attention to it, right? You can go through something as a child and it probably won't affect you till you're in your 40s. Trust me, I know. But I know. Like, let me go back and work on this stuff right here.
Yeah, it's true.
But the body does keep score.
It does.
If these things don't go unchecked, as I like to tell the men that I worked with, if these things go unchecked, it'll come back and check you. Right? like, oh yeah,
that is so great. Yes.
You can hear it, take that.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's the beautiful part about the world that we live in now. Having so many people that have experience in these different areas. We don't have to leave no one out. Right? We don't have to leave anyone out. But it's, I'm a firm believer, find someone that you can relate to. Right? And in groups, in community, and things like that, and surround yourself with those individuals so you can learn.
Yes,
right?
Agree.
And let them speak life and love into you, and uplift you when you're not at your best, right? Because not every day is going to be a great day, Or I changed that. I'm going to change that because I came up with a different philosophy for that. I often say not every moment is going to be a great moment. But if you can learn to sit in that moment, extract information and begin the little small pieces of healing, once you've extracted what you needed from that moment, let it go like the wind, you can go into the next moment just a little bit more lighter. So I don't believe in bad days. I believe in challenging moments. And I chunk my day up into that, and if I can be a student in one moment, it allows me to be a teacher in the next. Constantly learning, and I'm constantly sharing. And I think, it takes individuals who understand that a process similar to that, not everybody's going to do what I do, but I'm saying that not everybody's going to do what you do. I do better. I'm like, that's more you, because I don't yoga. I don't bend like I don't bend like that. I don't.
Nobody needs to. Actually, and that's part of the beauty of the work that I teach. Actually, I'm not bendy either. So it's not about the posture or the shape or the achievement. It's about, that can be yoga. It is yoga. It is a trauma movement if we are doing it in ways that we are hearing our body, listening to the body, making choice over the body. It is not about, doing fancy pretzel things. If you watch my daily practice, it is the least interesting thing ever. So, and I think that actually, I love that you brought that last piece up, because that is very intimidating for a lot of people. The number one thing people say to me when they find out that I'm a trauma sensitive yoga teacher is I'm not flexible. I'm not either, actually. So I live in Canada, as I mentioned at the very beginning, and we had something that was like the American presidential fitness test. And when I was in grade 7, I'm like the bottom 1% of flexibility. So this stuff is not, so it's nothing to do with flexibility. It's about moving in ways that my body likes and wants to move through. And that can be different from day to day. So, I mean, I'm a human being. I have stress, I have panic, I have fear, I have anxiety, I have also great joy and happiness and all the things. So it's really assessing, where am I today? What does my body need? And using movement as a tool for my human development and integration. It's not about being like, oh, I have to do this certain posture because I'm never going to be able to. So, if that makes anybody feel better. I love what you were just saying. We need other people. That's a full sentence. Human beings have a social nervous system where we attune to other people, we read their energy. We, however, are culturally taught that we should be these self-contained units. Everything comes from us. We must do this all ourselves. It is just not a fact. There is nothing in our human biology that is, we did not develop that way. We developed to be in community with other people. So when we are not at our best, that is the best moment ever to go and find a person who's one step in front of you, or one step behind you, or one step beside you, and absorb from them. It's also a great moment to mentor someone. We all learn things and we know things, and it doesn't need to be intellectual, but just being with another person is so incredibly critical as a human being. And it doesn't mean that we can be with other people all day. It also doesn't mean outsourcing, this is my grief, take it and fix it. We have to be responsible for that. But part of self-responsibility might be calling a friend or a mentor or going to a group. We are not going to ever, there's two things I know. We're not going to ever integrate experiences sitting on our couch alone and getting it all right, and then going out into public and being the person that we want to be. And the second thing is, we're never going to do it sitting. So there's a lot that can be done in groups and grief circles and therapy, but if we do not move our body, it will not move out of our body. And movement can be music, it can be drumming, it can be shaking a rattle, it can be a formal exercise program, it can be art, it can be a lot of things. But there isn't any human on this planet, has never been and probably never will be, where we are going to have integrated healthy mental health experiences by being completely sedentary. That does not exist. Conversely, and adjunctively, ditto on the just being by ourselves. So at all moments when you feel overwhelmed by experiences, if there's kind of one thing that I would want to leave as a message, it is find another person and move your body. And those two things can happen at the same time, or they can happen separately. But any notion where it's like we sit in a chair, we talk through it, and we get over it, and we do that by ourselves, it's biologically false.
I love that. I want to add to that,
Please do.
if I may.
Yeah, please
And
do.
I want to make sure that I do it justice because, when I got into this work, I learned everything on my own.
Yeah.
I didn't have anyone to comfort me or walk with me.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But inside of that loneliness, I found comfort. I found knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there was a lot of pain as well,
Yep.
but I learned to embrace the pain, to begin to pick it apart, and it became like a friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I got, it was, you never get used to the pain, but when it showed up, it was there was no sense of fear of what it was bringing along with it.
Yeah.
And once I began to connect the dots to it, I realized that I was healing.
Yeah.
I was healing pieces of me that I, like you said in the beginning, that I never knew that needed healing. But, over a period of time, I began to dissect myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I began to force my brain to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
And I go, no, why is that blur there? Clear that up for me so I can go in there and I can check that. I want to go in there. I want to see what that's what it was. Why are you trying to hide? And these are things that I would ask myself, right, as I went through the process. Now, I enjoyed the fact that I was alone. And the reason, and not every, I don't suggest that for everyone. I really don't, right? I really don't. It can put you in a really bad place. I was very fortunate and lucky because, I almost didn't make it out. So I don't want anybody to think that it was an easy process. I lost everything and almost took my own life in those dark moments. But I hit my version of rock bottom because the shovel broke. And I was just so tired of it.
Yeah.
I use that analogy because somebody
It's
told
so
me.
good. That's really good.
And I was like, they say sometimes you got to kick the shovel away. I said, no, let them dig to that version of rock bottom. Don't you stop the process because it's not yours to stop. Just make sure that you're there to let them know that somebody still cares.
Yes.
And I was pretty fortunate in that aspect. There was people that came along, seasonal people that came along and said, Tony, I care, man. But I did. I hit that version because my shovel broke. But eventually in that dark moment, in that moment where I was like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. That's when that moment came, and I was like, oh, let me explore this a little bit. And so instead of searching for someone to save me, I began to use the trauma and the dirt that was pushed on top of my head as a platform. And the more and more it piled up, the more and more I was able to stand up. Now, once I got to the top, I was beaten, battered, and bruised. You know what I'm saying? But I was able to brush myself off a little bit and come out in a new version. So, and the reason why I say that, because I believe there's different types of people in the world.
Sure.
Like myself, I believe, as a matter of fact, I'm almost certain, I'm the seasonal one. And that comes with a certain sense of responsibility, meaning I don't get the privilege of being attached to people, places, or things because I'm constantly moving through. I'm only there for a brief moment to walk you to your next destination. Now, when you go to where you go, I'm going to wish you well because I know that you have community. But I also have to keep moving as well because I don't know who needs what I carry. Right. And I want to be open. I want to be open to receiving what they need from me so I can give without expectations. Right. And you have those people who are community,
Oh, for sure.
right?
Yeah.
They're very sociable. They need that interaction. And again, that's just my thought pattern on it.
I think you said a couple of really key important things. One was you were curious and you used inquiry. So where we get into trouble is feeling something, whether that's in our body or our brain, and trying to push it away and trying to make it go away. And that often is where we get into those addiction spirals or coping mechanism spirals, because we're trying to outshop it or out exercise it or out gamble it or out drug it or out drink it or whatever it is. So one of the key pieces of that story was that you used the word inquiry in different ways multiple times. You were not afraid to look there, and you just kept digging until the shovel broke, which, by the way, I love that. And then you kind of accepted what was there. I mean, I also love that you said that you don't get used to the pain. That's true. But that you knew that when that pain came, that you weren't stuck there. It wasn't going to last forever. That's so key. So those uncomfortable sensations, those uncomfortable thoughts, you could sit with them figuratively or literally and just let it pass. Then I think another thing that you just touched on was, I think it's important to say it. Like when I talk about other people in community, it doesn't mean that every thought and every action and every kind of panic needs to be with another person. It doesn't. It shouldn't. That's not being responsible for yourself. But that you had somebody somewhere in your sphere that believed in you, that was there for you, that you knew that you could call, or that was calling you. And I think that's really where that's what it means. It means that you're not actually alone forever, right? Yes. And you don't need a whole list of people. You need one person that actually can show up, and they can be transient. It could be Tony for 20 minutes. And I think really part of why movement and music and rhythm are so good for our experiences too is because they are temporary. If you bang on a drum, that makes a sound, there's some resonance, and that drum beat at that moment is gone forever. It never comes back. You can hit it again, it's going to be slightly different, and then that never comes back. Same thing with if you take a walk, that footstep, that moment, that's gone. And that's part of life, and it's part of just accepting that we kind of can't grab a moment and hold it. That counts for joy, but that also counts for that grief. So that transient piece that you talked about is so important, because life is transient. We do not get to be 22 years old or 25 years old or 47 years old, or pick a number. That we can't say, okay, today's the perfect day, perfect moment, perfect circumstances, let's hold it. And again, I think we're kind of culturally taught towards that idea where if we do X and Y and Z and we get that perfect spouse in the house and this and that, like everything will be perfect. It's not. Right? So that idea where you are, you're allowing kind of the waves of your moving, your practice and your business and your coaching and your life and your friendships to actually just move where they need to move. That's part of the whole process. And that's part of also what exercise and music and art teach you, that there is that moving in and moving out, and there's an impermanence to, I mean, you name it. It's all impermanent. Children are impermanent, and our age is impermanent, and our appearance is impermanent. It all is. And that includes those negative pieces that are hard. That pain is also impermanent. And so is grief, and so is fear. But so too is joy and laughter, and all of it is. So I think the more, I love that you said that you just kind of walk with the next person and you have that transience. That's what we want, actually. It's great if we have kind of some permanent roots in life, but it's change, and it's going to shift. Oh, did we lose me?
Yeah, you dropped out, but you back though. Think you back. You back.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we're gonna change and we're gonna shift, and there is impermanence for all of us, and we can't kind of just build a castle and put up a wall and everything's perfect hereafter and we've got it all set. So you touched on a lot of elements there that are just they're known pieces of kind of how we practice and how we recover and how we come to pass with these things. And I think they're all so important, that taking responsibility for yourself and being curious and sitting with pain and knowing that it until you actually understand that too will pass, and that there are waves and impermanences, and that you can go where you need to be. That's all just beautiful.
Right. Well, you said it in the beginning, and that's what sparked everything, opened up the doors. You said your body, and your body is you, right?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
part of the same.
Yeah.
And which actually took me to a quote, as you were talking, and it reminded me of something that Bruce Lee said, be like water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Water forms to whatever shape it goes into. And, so be like water. And so.
Yeah. Love that.
I would say with grief and trauma, instead of trying to change it.
Yes.
Be with it.
Yes.
It is part of who you are. And here's the beautiful thing about it that I always try to remind people about. It is meant to change you.
Yes.
It is meant to change you and to remind you that you made it, that you loved,
mm-hmm.
that these individuals who have now transitioned, they have not left you. The energy is there.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be able to be like water. You have to form with it, and it will give you something back in return. It's just like if you fill a cup, when it spills over, well, you put another cup there, let it fill in that one.
Yeah.
That can be sort of like the grace that we so need as we're going through these challenging moments in life. And it takes people like yourself and other amazing individuals out here in this world to be able to walk with them and share and uplift them. And I'm a firm believer, just speaking life into people. I don't think we have enough people in the world that understands the importance of speaking life and love into the next person. I think we get so wrapped up into our own individual pain that we forget that this is a shared experience.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And having compassion for that, because that is there is not one person in this planet who gets out of here without having grief.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that it undermines your experience at this moment, but none of us get out of here without it. So it's a common humanity. That's just how it is. We're going to lose somebody. We're going to lose something. We're going to lose ourselves. It doesn't matter if it's us or someone else or something else. We all have loss in this life. And that is very comforting, because we know that it's not just us and that it's not just our experience. It's a universal human experience.
Yes. Before I let you go, Janis, I know you probably got a busy day today and everything with the 4th coming up. I can always see you like, I got fireworks, Tony. I got to go, man. But before I let you go, if you can leave the audience with something today, what would you leave them with?
We need to move our body. And when we have that, grief is just heavy. It's dark. It feels black. It feels like we're stuck to the floor. And it can be the hardest thing ever to stand up, let alone, think about exercising. but just recognize that our body is part of the process. It's not separate from it. And that movement can look like just, standing up. It can look like moving our arm. But experiencing what it is to move is part of the process of grief. And it's part of feeling discomfort. It's part of feeling freedom. It's part of feeling rhythm. It's part of feeling connection. So I think, I obviously have a bias as an exercise specialist, but knowing that those dark, heavy feelings are an emotional experience that don't override the fact that we still have a biological body. And to kind of start to, if you don't have an exercise or movement practice, a good moment to explore it, because we know that it's good for your mental health. It's a changing experience to kind of bring that in. And that doesn't mean joining a gym in the peak of grief, but what it means is exploring sensations of the body, exploring movement of the body, exploring rhythm, doing that maybe in community, and really inviting the body to be part of the process, as opposed to many people kind of hate how the body feels, and it feels gross and like you want to cut your body out of it. But that's really the moment to pull it in and say, hey, body, let's be friends in this process. And how can I move you and nourish you and make sure that there's enough sleep and enough choice and enough opportunity to really bring the body into the process. And that's, it's so hard, but just really getting curious, the way that you spoke of doing that emotionally, same thing. Can you do that during this process, during this time period, and invite the body to be your best ally, because it really is.
Right. Love that. I definitely love it. Where can people find you?
They can find me at My Body Couture. So that's 3 words. First word is my, M-Y. Second word is body, B-O-D-Y. Couture, C-O-U-T-U-R-E is the third word. So I'm at the .com. I'm also on any social media site where I'm active. That is where you will also find me. So you can reach out, send me a DM, leave me a comment, start a conversation, ask me for tips, whatever you'd like to do. I'm here for it.
The links are going to be down below. And I want to say, Janis, thank you for such an amazing conversation. Enjoyed it immensely. I look forward to having many, many more. So you guys, if you want to reach out to her, all the information is going to be down below, and make it easy for you guys. And so with that being said, everybody on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch,
all the places.
Guys, all the places out there, Rumble. You guys are amazing. Thank you guys for tuning in. And if you made it this far, if you haven't already, do me a favor. Head over to their YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And enjoy your 4th. We won't be doing an episode tomorrow. And we're going to be coming back over the weekend as well. Dropping some new episodes for you guys. But guys, keep your eyes out for the new series that we got coming up. Starting July 13th, 12 p.m. Mountain Time, Ancestral Healing, breaking the bonds of the ancestral traumas that we may carry so you can live a more abundant life. It's an 8-week series, twice a month. We got some great people that's going to be coming up there. And guys, tune in for that. It's also going to be live streamed, so you guys keep that in mind. And if you know anyone who could benefit from the conversations that we have, please share this along with them. This helps us get the content out there and reach a lot more people. Now, this is going to end this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. And as always, I have that information down there. You got my website. If you guys need any support or know any man who needs support, go to their website. Let me know. I'll reach out to them and we'll take care of them from there. All right. Again, thank my guest today, Ms. Janis. Amazing. Thank you so much. And we're going to see you guys in the next episode. Enjoy your 4th.